What does it feel like to pull a trigger and watch a row of enemies fall in a single second? Your weapon's distinctive sound immediately makes you the most hunted man on the battlefield, and the first one to be looked for by enemy snipers, artillery, and tanks. From time to time, you get some really disturbing orders from your commanders to do something that would haunt you for the rest of your life or outright cause you mental breakdown. Today we're talking about the terrifying life of the German machine gun crew in World War II, who operated the most feared automatic weapon in modern warfare. Let's begin. When we talk about World War II's most feared weapons, nothing sent chills down Allied soldiers' spines, quite like the distinctive sound of a German MG42, especially when you need to attack its position. The Americans often made fun of enemy weapons, mocking them, giving nicknames such as idiot bomb or door knocker for an anti-tank gun that couldn't penetrate their tanks. However, Hitler's buzzsaw, nicknamed for MG42, one of two main German machine guns of the war, wasn't so funny. It might sound exaggerated, but firing 1,200 rounds per minute could literally cut a man in half with a 1-second burst, and someone was unfortunate enough to confirm that. So, let's quickly go over the introduction, how German machine gun crews operated, and why it was such a terrifying experience for the people on both sides of the trigger. Some of it might surprise you, by the way. As Germany secretly rebuilt its military machine after World War I, they desperately needed to modernize their firepower. The old water-cooled MG08 was a lumbering beast weighing 88 pounds, not exactly ideal for the lightning-fast blitzkrieg tactics Hitler had in mind. German engineers first created the MG13, slashing the weight down to just 28 pounds. But its tiny 25-round magazine emptied in 2.5 seconds, barely enough time to say Heil Hitler before needing to reload. 4 years later came the MG34, the world's first true general-purpose machine gun. Belt-fed with quick-change barrel system, it was undoubtedly revolutionary, but it was absurdly expensive for enormous wartime needs, sensitive to dirt and cold, and required 150 man-hours to produce a single gun. German engineers were then tasked with quite a difficult challenge to create a better, more reliable machine gun, with a terrifying rate of fire between 20 to 25 rounds per second, while making it cheaper and easier to manufacture. To everyone's surprise, they created what is considered the best machine gun ever made, that is still in service today with only minor modifications. The MG42 was made from stamped metal parts, cutting production cost and time in half. It was significantly more reliable than its predecessor and could spit out more than double the rounds per minute than Allied machine guns could. By war's end, over 400,000 of them were produced, enough to ruin a day for many Allied soldiers. For the German army standardly armed with 5-round bolt-action rifles, the machine gun was the core of firepower. While Allied squads treated automatic weapons as support for riflemen, the entire German squad was built around the machine gun with ingenious tactics to support, protect, and maximize its killing power, typically consisted of 10 men with a 3-man machine gun team at its heart. The gunner carried and fired either MG34 or MG42 with a 50-round drum as ready ammunition and a sidearm, usually a pistol. Beside him was the assistant gunner, carrying 4 additional drums and a 300-round ammo box. Armed with just a pistol, his job was to assist the gunner in feeding ammunition, clearing jams, reloading, and quickly swapping barrels during combat. If the gunner went down, the assistant immediately took over. Behind them was the ammunition carrier, lugging 2 additional 300-round boxes, and armed with a shortened Kar-98 rifle. These 3 men carried a minimum of 1,800 rounds of the powerful 7.92 Mauser. The remaining 7 squad members, the leader with his MP40 submachine gun and 5 riflemen, essentially functioned as a protective shell around this deadly core. Their job was to keep the machine gun operational at all costs. In attack, the riflemen would charge enemy positions while the machine gun provided covering fire. In defense, they'd protect the gun against flanking maneuvers. So, the machine gun and its crew were simultaneously the most powerful and most vulnerable on the battlefield. The enemy knew that if you could eliminate the machine gun, you could eliminate the squad's primary source of firepower. This made machine gun crews the first target for all branches of the enemy army, from snipers to tanks. Operating an MG42 was a complex, physically demanding skill that required precise coordination between crew members. A fresh barrel allowed for only about 20 seconds of continuous fire before overheating. After approximately 250 rounds, the barrel had to be replaced immediately, and a well-trained crew could complete this process in just a couple of seconds. Allied soldiers knew about this brief vulnerability and were trained to use that narrow window during barrel changes to advance. With its bipod, the MG42 was relatively light and easy to deploy in prone positions, ideal for offensive maneuvers, but still with substantial recoil going into your shoulder. Mounted on its tripod, it became a heavy machine gun and a fixed-position defense nightmare. The lafette tripod had a built-in mechanism that automatically moved the gun in a preset sweeping pattern when firing, and is actually the most ingenious thing about German machine guns. Using the tripod and its optics, they could fire low to the ground and extremely accurately even at long ranges. They could even tie a string to the trigger and fire it remotely from cover using that mechanism. So, what separated machine gunners from other combat troops wasn't just their weapon, but the psychological burden they carried, and for a couple of reasons. The first thing is, while a rifleman might kill a dozen enemies during a battle, a machine gunner could end hundreds of lives in minutes. Take Heinrich Severloh, a German machine gunner stationed at Omaha Beach during D-Day. In a single day, he fired approximately 13,000 rounds and was responsible for hundreds, if not thousands, of Allied deaths. How does a human mind process such a terrifying level of carnage? The answer is, often it doesn't. There were numerous reports of German machine gunners suffering severe psychological breakdowns after battles, particularly on the Eastern Front, where Soviet human wave attacks meant firing into masses of soldiers until the gun overheated or ran out of ammunition, and we couldn't even imagine the sight they were seeing. However, that thing, no matter how terrifying, was actually the easier to comprehend. You're shooting at soldiers charging at you to do the same thing to you. It's a war after all. But from time to time, German machine guns, and of course their operators, would get some, lightly said, dark jobs. In occupied territories, they were sometimes used as a tool of terror and control, deployed in retaliatory operations against resistance movements and especially civilian populations. One of the most disturbing examples occurred in occupied Yugoslavia, where approximately 2,700 civilians were executed as retaliation for resistance attacks and capture of an entire German infantry company. Here, German generals, being furious, implemented a notorious directive where one dead German soldier would cost 100 civilians and one wounded 50. They promptly did the math for 10 Germans killed and 26 wounded in this particular incident, rounded up local inhabitants of WWII, and ordered machine gunners to do their job. Group after group, they did that for a full 7 hours. One German soldier refused the order to participate in this and was executed on the spot by his commanding officer. For machine gunners assigned to these so-called operations, the psychological toll was indescribable. Many were understandably haunted and scarred for life by what they had to do. Going back to the battlefield, that distinctive ripping cloth noise that gave it its buzzsaw nickname was in a way a curse for its crews. While it surely terrified the enemy, it also revealed the gunner's position after just a few rounds, and the whole front would focus on them. Because of this, crews had to frequently change positions during combat to survive, but in defensive positions where you have nowhere to go and would be executed by your commander if you tried to retreat without being authorized, this led to astronomical casualty rates among machine gun crews. Another terrifying aspect of being a German machine gunner was the knowledge of what would most likely happen if you were captured. Allied soldiers who had just watched their comrades cut down by the dozens weren't exactly handing out cigarettes and handshakes to captured MG crews, so a lot of times they would rather fight till the end. The design of both the MG42 and 42 was so effective that it influenced nearly every modern machine gun that followed. In fact, the gun is still in service today under the name MG3, with just minor improvements and chambered for NATO ammunition. The Americans, who observed its terrifying firepower throughout the war, were so impressed that they attempted to reverse-engineer captured MG42s into the T-24 prototype, but they couldn't come close to this German-engineered monster. Eventually, they incorporated elements of its design into the later M60 machine gun, which would become famous during the Vietnam War. The German machine gunner was pushed into quite a paradoxical existence, having immense destructive power that simultaneously made them vulnerable, inflicting terror while often being terrified themselves. They were the most valuable asset in their squad and the most hunted men on the battlefield. The next time you hear the distinctive sound of an MG42 in a World War II movie, remember that behind that cool-looking weapon was a gunner who lived in constant fear and likely guilt, with terrifying life expectancy measured in minutes.